So first, a very warm welcome to all the crazy conspiracy theorists out there who are bold enough to watch a video about space Nazis. It's actually a very serious subject. Some lightness doesn't hurt. So how did it all happen? How did it start? How did it develop? And where does that information come from? Well, it comes from a wide variety of sources, actually. And those sources come from what you can call, and what is in fact usually called, the secret space programs. And whistleblowers, of course, from the secret space programs. And also what in the world of ufology is also traditionally called contactees, meaning people who've had or who have contacts with extraterrestrial civilizations and groups. So this variety of sources, when you connect them together, draw a coherent picture of the history and the actuality of the Nazi presence in space. So the way it started in the 30s, possibly even late 20s. In Germany, of course, there was a group. There was actually a whole, to speak a star language, constellation or nebula of groups that were sort of starting to lay the ideological ground, you might say, for Nazism to emerge as a political force. Groups like the Thule Gesellschaft, Thule Society, or the Vril Society. Some of these groups were very esoterically, metaphysically inclined, and that was certainly the case of the Vril Society. The Vril Society had a group of psychic women, very gifted psychic women. The most prominent one of them was called Maria Orsic. Maria Orsic, you can look for pictures of her. Very beautiful woman. Maria Orsic at some point started to receive transmissions, psychic transmissions, from Aldebaran. So the beings who were contacting her claimed that they were in Aldebaran, the star system Aldebaran, and what they were transmitting to her were actual schematics, plans for the construction of a spacecraft. And these plans were very technical, very detailed, and there were also writings that were in the old Sumerian alphabet, interestingly. So you see these connections between ET groups and cultures, various cultures, in this case ancient cultures here on Earth. Maria Orsic drew the attention once the Nazis came to power, political power. Her work drew their attention, and so she was recruited, you could almost say drafted, by the Nazi leadership. And that was the first source for the development of spacefaring technology, because these plans, these schematics, they were serious. They were the real deal. They were operational. But there were two other sources for the development of space travel technology that they benefited from. And the first was crashed UFOs. That actually played a big role in the development of the secret space programs. And you could wonder whether these crashes were accidental, whether the ETs involved staged them on purpose for technology transfers to occur. I have my idea on the subject, but there were UFO crashes. There was at least one UFO crash in Germany, and even before the German ones, there was a UFO crash in fascist Italy. So it started to happen early on. So that was source number 2. Source number 3 was a contact that was made at some point by the Draconian Empire. They took the initiative to contact the Nazis, and I say specifically the Draconian Empire because not all Draconians are part of that bellicose, warmongering, aggressive, conquering structure that is the Draconian Empire. You have dissident groups, and you have very benevolent Draconians, and Draconians who are even trying to support us and protect us the best they can. But it was definitely the empire that made a partnership with the Nazis and started to help them develop space travel technology. So basically what that means, space travel technology is the development of anti-gravity propulsion engines or devices and exotic energy sources. Exotic meaning definitely not fossil fuel technology, nor nuclear fission or any of that, any of these backward energy sources. More along the points of what some physicists call zero-point technology. Anyway, that research was very successful, very successful. You know, the Nazis, they were placing high hopes on what historians call wonder weapons, Wunderwaffen, that they were hoping were going to enable them to win the war, advanced technology weapons. And we know some of them. Well, I mean by that mainstream historians know some of them, like the V1 and V2 rockets and the first Leopard and Tiger tanks and whatnot. But this is really another ballpark. This is really quite another type of wonder weapons. And the fact is they couldn't deploy these fast enough. What I mean by that is that they had operational prototypes at various stages of development, and they were flying very well, and they could even travel in space quite well. But the issue was the weaponry. What weapons could they equip those with? Because cannons, machine guns were too heavy for these early prototype crafts. And I would also say that there is an issue with two different types of technology that are generated from two different paradigms that you can't really marry. You can't really blend them together. It's not gonna work. So what these flying saucers, because they were flying saucer shaped, what they needed was particle beam weapons. That's the type of weapon that you want for this type of craft. But the Nazi scientists couldn't develop those fast enough to equip the flying saucers with. Which is why at the end of the war they had to evacuate. So they had to let go of Germany, even though they kept a very significant presence in Germany. They had to give up the idea of making it the world hegemon and expanding, creating a colonial empire, a German colonial empire in Eastern Europe. They had to let go of that project, so they reoriented themselves, but they evacuated their most advanced prototypes. So when the Allies and the Soviets invaded Germany, they could grab the more primitive prototypes, but the really advanced ones, the Nazis evacuated to Antarctica, where they had a presence, because their successful aircrafts and spacecrafts, they had been able to reach the moon with them and to reach Mars, but they had also discovered ancient ET bases in Antarctica. They had sent expeditions all over the world actually to find ancient artifacts, and they were not the first to do that by any means. There had been numerous expeditions organized in the 19th and first part of the 20th century by secret societies and by wealthy banking industrialist families, you know, the usual suspects, to find ancient items, ancient technologies, ancient devices, sources of power, you know. So they had found these ancient abandoned bases in Antarctica, and there were other bases in Antarctica that were still occupied, by the way. But they were able to occupy the abandoned ones, and so to create their little colony there in Antarctica. So that's where these crafts were relocated, and they formed the core of their future space fleet, as it was to develop. It was to be developed in the decades after the war. Now okay, let me find a better angle. Okay, that's better. The next stage of that unfolding story was when the Americans realized what was going on in Antarctica and decided they really needed to put an end to that. What a crazy idea, right? So they sent a whole naval battle group to Antarctica in order to root out the Nazis there. That battle group was commanded by a guy called Admiral Byrd, B-Y-R-D. Interesting character. There was an aircraft carrier and destroyers and whatnot. And they had a really, really bad surprise when they arrived there. because they got a severe beating, because by that time the Nazi scientists had developed the particle beam weapons, and so their flying saucers were much faster and much more maneuverable than the American jets, and they had particle beam weapons this time. So basically there was nothing the Navy could do to intercept or to defend them, to protect themselves from these aircrafts, and they had to retreat. They had to retreat with their tail between their legs, really. So, right after that, well, maybe not right after that, but after that, these Nazis, Antarctica-based Nazis, they decided to make a show of force. And what they did was that they sent their flying saucers to fly over Washington DC, over the you know, the famous political structures in the landscape of Washington DC, like the White House and the Congress. And that got a lot of media coverage at the time, that incident that took place in 1954, if I'm not mistaken. That got a lot of media coverage, but you know, amnesia. The people have forgotten about all of this. Memory holes. So, of course, there were no swastikas painted on these aircrafts, you know. Nobody knew, well, no, nobody knew when it happened where they were coming from or what their intentions might be. But the Nazis then took contact with American authorities, and they said, all right, you've seen what we can do. There is nothing you can do to intercept our fleet. So let's talk. Let's sit at the table and discuss matters like adults, like grown-ups, and let's make a deal. And that is exactly what happened. So the way they presented it was, all right, so we have that technology that you could really benefit from, you know, to become the next, or to stay the new world hegemon, the paramount world power. And we need the might of your industrial base in order to mass produce them. Because at the time, of course, the United States were by far the main industrial power of the planet. How times have changed. Anyway, I digress. So there was an agreement. There was an agreement of cooperation along these lines. And again, for the development of the US secret space program, that was not the only source. It was not the only source of, it was not the only transfer of technology. I mean, the Nazi source, that was not the only source of transfer that the American US Army benefited from, especially the US Navy. But regarding this one, yeah, that had implications, of course. Some researchers went as far as saying that America sold its soul for technology So thanks to that partnership, and of course thanks to the position of Werner von Braun at the head of NASA, and all the funds he was able to divert to benefit the Nazi space program, they were able to develop a really sizable fleet and to develop their operations in space. So they had their Mars and moon settlements that they abandoned at some point, but they developed a presence on Ceres, which is a very large asteroid in our solar system, and they kept their partnership with the Draconian Empire. They developed a really powerful presence in space, that they called the Nachtwaffen, which literally translates as the night weapons. But in the world of UFO research and exopolitics, in the English-speaking world, it is called the Dark Fleet. It has a ring to it, doesn't it? Dark Fleet. So, well, being allied, being Nazis and being allied with the Draconian empires kind of makes you a pretty dark force. Yeah, undoubtedly. So they have basically grown as a kind of commercial, corporate, armed, militarized force that operates on a large scale, on an interstellar scale. In addition to the presence they've kept on Earth that I've discussed in the previous video, this is actually their primary power infrastructure. And they've been very involved in slave trade, because there is an interstellar slave trade in this galaxy, and Earth humans are a primary commodity for that slave trade, because everyone is interested in our genetics, which are very unique, very unique, cutting edge. Okay, so where are we? 23 minutes. So just one last word. That source from Aldebaran, the initial source, the information that Maria Orsic was receiving. And by the way, when she realized who the Nazis really were, she got the hell out of there. Her escape was organized and she got the hell out of there. But these guys from Aldebaran, they were a type of extraterrestrials that look exactly like the Nordic people here on Earth, the Scandinavian people. And you might wonder, how is that possible? You know, how is that possible that people in other star systems would have the exact same appearance as Earth humans? And that's a subject for another video, but let's just say that the human type is much more ancient than Earth humans are. So these guys, these Aldebaran people, I believe, because there are various Nordic looking groups in the galaxy, I believe that specific one was part of what you can call, what George Cavassalas calls the synthetic Nordics. So the synthetic Nordics, what are they? Well, they are a race that has been mm, genetically engineered by a group of Draconians who wanted to create the ultimate avatar physiology, and who went all around the galaxy and grabbed all the genetics they could uh, put their hands and their clothes on because they wanted to create a body that would have all of the best um, traits and abilities and powers that were in existence in our galaxy. And they also wanted the best looks, but they considered to be most attractive. And they found that the Nordic human looking type was the most attractive. So they wanted it to look really stunning. And they managed to do that. And then they started incarnating into these new bodies. Yeah, more details about that in other videos, but that's something that can definitely be achieved. So they started to, their spirits started to incarnate, because that was the purpose, the final purpose of the whole operation. And these new synthetic Nordics, inhabited by Draconian spirits, were considering themselves to be the superior race, the master race. Does that sound familiar? So you can see how that group was a major influence behind Nazi ideology, because their own ideology, through their influence, you might say their telepathic and energetic and consciousness influence, started to transpire into the minds of the people who were the precursors of the Nazi movement and the Nazi ideology. So that's where it came from. And they wanted to use Nazi Germany and Nazism as a whole as a vehicle to assert and grow their influence on planet Earth. So, as is very often the case, and I would say almost always the case, or even maybe always the case, when on the geopolitical stage a power appears and develops itself extremely quickly, you can bet that there is an ET actor, an ET faction behind them that wants to maneuver its pawns on the chessboard to either undermine a rival or get into a more prominent position. And that's exactly what happened. And that's how we got Nazism, and that's how we got Nazis in space.
Apart from making these videos, I offer services as a spiritual counselor, a coach, a healer, and a teacher of the ways of what I consider to be authentic, natural spirituality, as opposed to the many versions of spirituality that are inspired by and infused with what I consider to be synthetic light. So the approaches I work with, the processes, the tools, all help to free us from the many layers of control and programming that we have been subjected to, that have been imposed upon us in order to keep us restricted. I believe, in fact, I know that we are beings of infinite potential. And I am here to help free us from the grip of the forces of limitation so we can express and be more of who we truly are. So if you want to know more about my services, feel free to write me an email at the email address that is written in the description of this video. All the best to you.